GTA? Well, quite frankly, Ontario is probably going to, as a province, is going to underperform the national average. We think the Canadian economy will contract about 2.5% this year, the Ontario economy contracting 3%, and quite frankly, the GTA is the biggest part of the Ontario economy. So this is a very challenging, very difficult environment. The unemployment rates are going to continue to rise. Unemployment 12 months ago was around 7% in Toronto. Now it's at 9%. I suspect that ultimately we're headed for around 11 or 12% before this is all done and said. Now, when you look at this environment, it basically induces an awful lot of pessimism, right? Because it is a very deep recession, and we need to be pragmatic about that. But the thing you also need to understand is that we've been in recessions before. We had recessions in the early 70s, the early 80s, the early 90s. Now, Canada was very fortunate. It avoided a recession in 2001. Which means really the last recession in Canada was the early 90s recession. This creates a real problem for me because most of my staff have never actually seen a recession before. They've never been in one. They have no idea what one looks like. Right? I keep encouraging them to go talk to the gray-haired employees around to get a perception of what a recession's like. Because when you're in a recession, it's really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the reality is, as bad as it feels, ultimately you always recover. We recovered from the 70s recession, we recovered from the 80s recession, we recovered from the 90s recession. And as I said, when you're in it, oh my God, it feels terrible. And right now I'd argue an awful lot of what is happening is also being driven by psychology. Right? If you get bombarded with negative news constantly, endlessly, it starts to have an impact. I'll give you a great example of this. I was up in Ottawa in December to do a consultation with the government around the budget, upcoming budget in January. And I went, the Department of Finance meeting ran from 4 until 6 p.m. on a Friday. It was so kind. So, I decided I could either spend the evening flying back to my home in Burlington, or I could stay overnight. So I decided I'd stay overnight. And I went out for dinner with a bunch of my former colleagues that are senior economists in the government. And we went out for dinner. One of them says he's cutting his Christmas spending in half. Right? They're still going to buy presents for the kids, but he and his wife weren't exchanging gifts. They weren't doing gifts with their parents. Right? And I thought about it for a second. This fella, his job's absolutely safe. The worst thing that's going to happen to him is his salary will get frozen at the current level. He had very little money in the market, and he has a defined benefit pension plan. Can somebody tell me why he's cutting back? Right? But that's the psychology. When the economy is in the downturn, and when the downturn is accelerating, and if you look at the headlines today, the Bank of Canada's forecast for the first quarter of GDP in Canada was more than -7% annualized. When your economy is accelerating on the downside, psychology is working against you. But as we go forward, one of the things we are going to find is that the negatives start to become less negative. And that's actually a positive. And I know it's a little hard to get your head around first thing in the morning, but ultimately, what is going to happen is the rate of decline is going to slow. And we're starting to see that in the United States. We're starting to see the elements of what you need for an economic recovery. I'd argue there's several pillars to the economic recovery. First one is you have to see the U.S. housing market start to stabilize, because otherwise losses keep piling up in the U.S. financial system. And what we're seeing is the inventory of unsold homes is starting to come down, the pace of price declines is starting to moderate. I expect that by the time we get to this time next year, the U.S. housing market will have really started to stabilize. The price declines will have stopped. But we've probably got to get another 12 months from now. Number two, credit conditions have to improve, because right now the financial system globally has been in distress. Well, the good news is all the government efforts to recapitalize the banking system in the United States and Europe is having a positive impact. It isn't a magic wand. The problem doesn't go away overnight, but with time, things will improve. And we're already seeing things like the lending, the interbank lending rates coming down. It's telling you the tide is improving, and the efforts by the government to recapitalize things are getting better with time. But again, it's going to take several more quarters. In fact, I actually think it's going to take several years for the financial system to be really fully repaired. We have to see a continued restructuring in the auto sector. And this one is a real wild card out there, because we're not sure exactly how the restructuring is going to take place. But from an Ontario and from a GTA point of view, we better hope that the restructuring continues to proceed, because, quite frankly, there's an awful lot of leverage of the Ontario economy to the auto sector. But ultimately, you are seeing things progress Interest rates have now come down to an all-time record low. Short-term interest rates in Canada are almost zero. Mortgage rates have never been as low as they are today. What this is telling you is basically that low interest rates should provide a stimulus to the economy going forward. But let me tell you, when the economy is accelerating on the downside, that's not when people say, gee, this is a great time to go buy a house. Right? But one of the things that will happen is as the negatives start to become less negative, as the pace of contraction starts to slow, people will start to realize that their worst fears are not coming true. And I guarantee you, over time, the negatives will start to diminish. Great example of this. In the fourth quarter of last year, when the U.S. consumer spending shrank more than 3%, the drop in consumer spending, 55% of the entire drop in consumer spending came in one category. You know what that category was? Food. The last time I checked, Americans have to eat. Right? What effectively happened was Americans said, that's it, it's a recession, we're not eating out. Restaurant sales tumbled. Right? One of the few restaurants out there that was still making good sales was McDonald's. What's it telling you? It's telling you people are going to the lowest cost restaurants if they are eating out. You know what the fastest selling food product in grocery stores right now in the United States is? Spam. I'm not entirely sure Spam's food. Right? The company that makes Spam announced that they're going to put in place that they're building a second factory. I am convinced the day that factory is completed is the day the recession is over. Because that's the way these things work. Once you've decided one quarter, that's it, you're not eating out, can you choose to eat out less the next quarter? No. Right? When you're basically eating Spam, can you cut your grocery bill more? Pretty hard to. Right? Ultimately, what you're going to find is the pace of decline starts to slow, and that is also where I think psychology turns. Because people will start to realize that things aren't getting worse at a faster rate, and the worst fears aren't coming true, and we will eventually get out of it. So the debate right now amongst economic forecasters like myself isn't whether a recovery will come. We know it's a valley. The debate is how wide is the valley and how deep is the valley. Right? Our best guess, and let's be honest, the crystal balls are unbelievably cracked and cloudy at the moment. Right? Our best guess is that the recovery will start around the early part of 2010. That by the end of this year, the economy will stop contracting. In the early part of next year, growth will start to come back again, and growth will gradually pick up. But we think it's going to be a pretty gradual recovery in 2010. It's going to be fairly slow because of the continued repair of the global financial system. And this is true about Canada, the United States, the Americas. Just as it was the most synchronous decline in history, we are probably going to find the recovery is also very synchronous. So next year, we think growth will come back up to around 1.5% in Canada. Again, not something you want to write home about, but certainly a much better outcome than where we are today. We will probably see the U.S. economy coming back up to around the 1 to 1.5% mark. And in the Americas, in Central and South America, again, the tide will turn. So from a business point of view, what you need to focus on is, number one, getting through the valley. Right? You got to do what's necessary to get through the valley. You got to be pragmatic about the fact we're in a deep recession. Number two, don't lose sight of the fact that it is a valley. Right? There's opportunities during tough economic times. But also, you need to still be thinking about what you're going to be doing as a business when the recovery is taking hold. And from the point of view of globalization is not repealed. So the increasing linkages of the global economy will only continue over time. In fact, the biggest threat we could have to the global economy is if protectionism raises its ugly head. Up to this point, we've been quite encouraged by the fact that all the governments have sort of said that they recognize that one of the things that made the 1930s recession so much deeper was the fact that protectionism was really brought into place in a very heavy-handed way. So ultimately what we need to do is continue to see trade and investment flows during the recession, even though they're going to be a lot weaker during the recession, because ultimately we are going to get to the other side of the valley, and economic conditions will recover just as they always have. Thank you.